Hi everyone, my name is Lori and I'm a developer on the Atlassian marketplace team. And today we're going to talk about how to win with code reviews. My goal for the end of this presentation is if you already haven't been doing code reviews, I hope you're now motivated to start doing them. And if you already have been doing code reviews, I hope that you gain some valuable insight to make the process a little less time-consuming and a little easier. Before I get into the talk, I want to start with a story about how I came up with this presentation. I was working at my previous company, and we were a really small dev team of 12 people. 2 of us worked on a Scala project, myself and my colleague named Greg. And the rest of the developers were working on a Java project. Being a team of 2, we were really nimble, and none of the Java developers needed to contribute to the Scala project. And everything was fine for 3 or 4 years until one day, Greg announced that he was leaving. And we realized that our bus factor was 1. So what is the bus factor? It's the number of people in your organization that can get hit by a bus before your company can no longer continue to function. So at that time, our bus factor was 1. And if I were to have been hit by a bus, then no one could have continued to work on the Scala project. So I came up with this presentation as a way to motivate our dev team to start doing code reviews and to convince them that it was actually a good idea to spread knowledge among the developers. So our agenda for today, first we'll be talking about the benefits of code reviews. We'll be talking about some guidelines for code authors, some guidelines for reviewers, and I'll be giving some general advice and tools you can use. First, I want to briefly describe the difference between pull requests and code reviews for those of you who might not use Git or are unfamiliar with pull requests. This is a screenshot of a code review in Crucible. And as you can see, there's a diff of your changes, and also you can write inline comments. Before I can explain what pull requests are, I first have to explain the Git feature branch workflow. So here you have your master branch, where the white circles represent commits to the master branch. And typically, the code on master can be deployed to production at any time, or it's already in production. And let's say you want to create a new feature or fix a bug. You would create a new branch off of master, represented by the purple circle. So you write your code, and once you're done, you want to merge it back into master. And this is the point at which you would open a pull request. And with the pull request, your colleagues are tasked with reviewing your changes and approving of them to be merged into master. So this is a screenshot of a pull request in Bitbucket. And as you can see, you can also see a diff of the changes, and you can also write inline comments. Additionally, you have reviewers, and you can also see the status of the pull request, whether it's open or closed, the branch that you created, and the branch that it's targeting to. And as I mentioned, your reviewers can approve your changes, and then you can merge them or not. So what are some of the benefits of code reviews? Firstly, they're a great way to uncover bugs because you have multiple eyes looking at a piece of code. Also, on the marketplace team, reviewers are responsible for doing manual testing on the changes. Secondly, they're a great way to learn how to write better code. I personally have learned so much from getting feedback on my pull requests and code reviews, and this is especially true if you are learning a new technology or you're new to a team. Lastly, code reviews are a great way to share knowledge among your team, especially when you're looking at code that is outside of a project that you're working on, or if you're working closely with someone on the same project, you can avoid writing duplicate code. So as a code author, you want your changes to get deployed to production as soon as possible. You don't want them to just be sitting unused and accumulating merge conflicts. So what are some things you can do to make that happen? Firstly, you want to make sure your code is as complete as possible. So this means doing manual testing, writing comments in line if necessary, writing unit tests, and just making sure that everything is as complete as possible. Opening small pull requests isn't always possible, but when you can, you should, so that your reviewers aren't overwhelmed with thousands of lines of code to review, which might take them days, and you're not waiting around forever to get feedback. This is a chart plotting the number of lines in a code review against the number of seconds that reviewers are looking at each line. And as you can see, the more lines there are in the review, the less amount of time people are spending looking at the changes. And as you get into the thousands and people are looking at 100 lines per second, they're not really understanding or seeing your changes, and your pull request is useless. So once again, try and open small pull requests when you can. Explaining your changes is important when people who are looking at your code might not understand the reason why you made the changes that you did, or why you took the approach that you did, especially if they aren't working on the same project as you are. So explaining your changes can help them get up to speed much faster. When you have a really long pull request, pointing out the important parts of your changes can be really valuable to help your reviewers focus on the most important parts of your changes and not waste time looking at like a variable name change, for example. So as a code reviewer, you want your feedback to be understood and accepted, and naturally, you'll have differing opinions from those of your colleagues. And you want your ideas to come across, but without hurting someone's ego or causing an argument. So how can you do that? Firstly, try not to nitpick. So first, focus on the correctness of the code and things like, is it opening up any security holes? Does it do what the issue describes? Is the build successful? Not focusing on things like white space changes or the names of a class. And in Bitbucket, when you open a pull request, you can actually see the status of the Bamboo build in the pull request, as well as the related JIRA issues. Don't be a jerk. Just remember that you're a team and you're working towards something together. And someone put a lot of hard work into writing the code that you are now critiquing. And it's really easy for your comments to come across as more harsh than you intended. And these really subtle things can make a big difference. Now I'm going to go through some examples of not so ideal comments and how they can be rewritten. So here's a bad example. Your code is awful. Why aren't you handling exceptions? Instead, you could say, seems like this code isn't handling exceptions. Let's add that in. And the difference here is that instead of critiquing the abilities of the developer by saying that they're awful. You're talking about the code and the functionality of the code itself. Sometimes when you give feedback, your feedback isn't 100% clear. And in this case, if you can, you should try and provide examples via a code snippet. So let's say this is a Scala example. Instead of saying, I think you should use pattern matching here, you could say, here's a simpler way this could be written, and then provide a little code snippet. And this is especially helpful for someone who's learning a new technology or someone who's more junior in their career. Seek first to understand. Sometimes when you come across an implementation that seems weird, you want to jump to conclusions and just ask questions bewilderedly. But instead of doing that, think about the fact that the person who wrote the code might actually know something that you don't. So instead of saying, this doesn't make any sense, why don't you just do blah, 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 you could say, what was your motivation for this approach? And the second example is a lot more neutral, but it still gives the opportunity for the person to explain what they did. Now I'm going to go over some tools and general advice. Firstly, scheduling time for pull requests can really help you stay on top of looking at pull requests that you're assigned to, instead of continually putting them off because they're at the bottom of your to-do list. And the marketplace team actually schedules half an hour or an hour every day after stand-up for everyone to look at pull requests. Sometimes when you are a reviewer, you want to comment on things like unused imports or line lengths that are too long. And this is actually pretty time-consuming and tedious and unnecessary because you could just use a code linting tool. Sometimes when you are a reviewer or an author, there are a lot of things that you need to check for. And using a checklist can help you remember all these things. And at the end of the presentation, I'll provide a list of resources that can show you some examples of things you might want to put in a checklist. The marketplace team uses this homegrown tool called Rainicorn. The name comes from a combination of rainbow and unicorn. And essentially it has 26 dev instances to which you can deploy any branch. And we use this when we open code reviews and we want someone to manually test the changes. Instead of them having to manually check out your branch, build it, and run it locally, they can just go to one of these Rainicorn dev instances, and it saves so much time. This is the Manage Features page in Bitbucket, and it has a list of experimental features that you can turn on and off. I believe there's only one that's public right now, which is this one, and it shows renamed and moved files in diffs. So sometimes when someone changes a file name or moves it, you just see like huge blocks of red and green code, and you don't know if anything else in the contents of the file actually changed. But with this feature, it shows you a percentage of how much the file is still the same. Lastly is this Chrome extension called Bitbucket Smart Reviewers. So sometimes when you open a pull request, you have a hard time figuring out who to choose as a reviewer, and this tool basically just suggests people to you, I believe based on who last touched the code that you changed. And you can see the names just within Bitbucket. So recapping, we talked about some things you should do as a code author. like keeping your pull requests small and explaining your changes. We also talked about some things you should do as a reviewer, like providing examples in your feedback and not nitpicking. We also talked about some tools and general guidelines, like using a code linter and scheduling time for pull requests. And if you're interested in diving a little deeper in code reviews and pull requests, you can go to go.atlassian.com/code reviews. So I hope this presentation was helpful for both people who already have been doing code reviews and people who haven't. I hope that if you already have been, you'll be able to use some of these tips to help make the process a little easier and less time-consuming. And if you haven't already been doing code reviews, I hope you are now motivated to. And if you have any advice or tips that have really helped you, I would love to know what they are. Please come talk to me afterward. Thank you.